Again, I'm Benji De La Peña. I'm the CEO of the Shared Use Mobility Center, and I have the pleasure of announcing the next panel. And we've been talking about climate, and this panel is about the narratives, the global narratives in decarbonizing transportation. And so I will call them one by one, and then I'll pass it on to your fantastic moderator for the afternoon. Sam Herr is the Executive Director of the North American Bike Share and Scooter Association. Give Sam a big hand. Jyot Chadha is the Deputy Director for NUMO, the New Urban Mobility Alliance. Karl Peet is the Knowledge Management and Impact Director, I got that right, of the SLOCAT Partnership on Sustainable Low Carbon Transportation.
Thanks, Benji.
And Christophe Arnaud is the CEO of Blue Systems, of the Bolloré, did I say that right? It's French. Bolloré Group of Smart Mobility Division, coming all the way from Paris. This time coming all the way from Costa Rica is my good friend. Don't get up yet because I have to introduce you. She helped me co-found Agile City Partners and the Global Network for Popular Transportation. But that's not the headline. The headline, which she never talks about, but I have to brag about, was this year she was named one of the remarkable voices, feminist voices in transportation. And the year before that, she was named by the Inter-American Development Bank one of Latin America's important female figures working in the transport sector today. And she also co-founded CPCSU. Andrea San Gil León.
Thank you so much for the introductions, Benji, and thank you all for being here today. Can you hear me well? Yeah? Okay, cool. So today we're going to be talking about the global narratives on decarbonization of transport. And it's really important that we talk about this because almost 15% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions that generate climate change and contribute to climate change come from the transport sector. To reduce these emissions, we need, compared to 2020 emissions, we need to cut by 59% to be able to achieve the climate goals of the Paris Agreement. But beyond the climate goals, we also need to improve access. And this is something that's being talked about in the 2030 SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals from the United Nations. And for this, we need to reduce vehicle miles traveled. We need to improve access, especially for the most vulnerabilized and marginalized communities. And so we need to combine those decarbonization goals with access and improving inclusion and equity considerations in transport. However, I'm not sure who here has seen the meme where there's a ton of microphones with one person, and that's the electric vehicles, and then no microphones for cycling, walking, public transports, etc. Who has seen that meme? Yeah, it's pretty popular. So the global narratives are very much focused on electrification, but we have a really good panel here on what needs to go beyond that. What do we need to talk about that goes beyond electrification of vehicles? Because just vehicle electrification is not enough. So I'm going to start the conversation with what do you think is working with these global narratives? What is missing from these conversations? And what you're contributing to change this? We'll go in deeper after that. But for now, a couple of minutes each, maybe this way, and then we can mix it up on what's going on, what's missing, and what are you contributing to these narratives?
Great, thank you. Is this working?
I think
Great.
so.
Yeah, I can hear myself. So thank you so much for moderating the panel and setting it up in such a fantastic way. And love that you brought in the meme of the microphone. So thank you for that in particular. So, you know, real quickly in terms of what's working, but I want to focus more on some of the gaps that I see because that's why we're talking today. Great that we're departing from fossil fuel, thinking about that. Also great that, you know, now more than ever, though, we need to do a lot more of this. Equity and transportation justice are entering the conversation. These are really encouraging things. But there are really three kind of high-level things that are missing to me in broad scale in the narrative that I want to talk about. So the first, broad-scale culture change from car-centrism to multimodalism. One of my favorite examples that I find super inspiring is that of Vancouver, who set a goal to have 50% of trips made by biking, cycling, biking, walking, or transit by 2020, and by committing themselves to that, funding it, creating those strategies, achieve that goal in 2015. So that tells me this can definitely happen when we commit to that. The second one is a framework of universal right to safe mobility, which includes mode choice. So it can't, it's not a right to mobility if it's, well, everyone has a car, so now everybody has universal mobility. First of all, that's totally not achievable, but second of all, it's also not actually the meaning of what a universal right to safe mobility would be. So I think that is also really missing from the conversation, and an example of that, although symbolic and there's a lot of implementation work that has to be done, is the law that Mexico passed, the National Law of Mobility and Road Safety, that actually added that to their constitution. So that's a really interesting thing to me to think about. And then the third, and I must say this, and everyone in the room knows I'm going to say this, but shared micromobility is largely missing from the narratives of decarbonizing transition. Thank you.
Hey.
Shared micromobility consistently over-delivers and is under-included in policy planning and projects. I want to cite a few things here. Over and over again, so NABSA puts out an annual industry report every year of shared micromobility, and we see over and over the numbers clearly show that shared micromobility is playing a really important role in scaling resilient, equitable, and sustainable transportation ecosystems. 63% of riders are using shared micromobility to connect to transit. 37% of trips are replacing auto trips. We see in, for example, New York City, when the subways flooded, that the redundancy that the city bike system created there was astronomically helpful when transit needs to repair, like the Orange Line in Boston, or even last month when I was there and there was some red line construction. So shared micromobility as well is just massively underrepresented in the narratives, and I'll pass it along.
Thanks, Sam. Jyot.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me here. So I wanted to start, I wanted to start actually with a story and take us back to the context of 2021 in the wake of COP26. From the sustainable transport community, the declaration that was up for consideration for action was actually, the only one over there was focused on electrification of vehicles, specifically on cars and vans, to electrify them globally, actions by different actors by 2040. And at COP, the European Cycling Federation, gathered folks together, recognizing this narrative is clearly not enough, is missing a lot, put together a letter, got a lot of support. In the days post that, a group of folks came together to start to think about how do we start to deal with this sort of dichotomy and this polarization that's happening in our small community within transportation between folks that are pushing forward electrification strategies and folks that are pushing for active, shared, mass transit, informal transit, compact city strategies. And so we pulled together a working group, nothing rocket science, but I will say again that the discussions were challenging. So it was NUMO, the World Resources Institute, Rocky Mountain Institute, ICCT, and Drive Electric, who are really leading sort of the charge of trying to pull together these diverse views and almost like fight it out in terms of what are these priorities, and a bunch of other organizations. And I think where the group came to was, how do we as a community talk about our priorities in a way that is equitable and where the outcomes are rooted in equity? And then I think the second is, how do we shift away from this narrative of electrification versus other strategies and move towards sort of a both-and strategy? So I think what I'd like to share at the start of this panel is that by making the table bigger, it allowed us to sort of move away from a solution that it was very tech-oriented, swap this engine with that battery and we will save things, and move to a more nuanced sort of systems change conversation and narrative. And I think that's always a difficult conversation to have because it is so nuanced, but that's the one we need to have.
Thanks so much. Karl, what are your thoughts?
Okay, thanks, Andrea. And I'd actually like to start by saying it's so exciting to be in a room full of people. I'm based in Chicago, but because we do global work at SLOCAT, I tend to be meeting up with the transport community in different parts of the world. So it's great. It's very refreshing to be at a conference that I can get to by bike and bus, as I have done. So I'd like to, again, as SLOCAT is global in focus, I'd like to give a bit of a macro view and to talk a bit about so the second edition of the Transport and Climate Change Global Status Report, also known as the TCC-GSR, which I know is Benji's favorite acronym. I'm going to give some trends, talk about some of the threats and opportunities that are coming out of the last version of the status report. So starting with a couple of the threats, as you had suggested, Andrea, in many countries, transport emissions are really not moving in the right direction. In, I think, 3/4 of countries, transport is the top or the second largest emitter. And in only 20% of countries, transport emissions have actually decreased in the last decade. We also see that high-income countries accounted for 50% of transport emissions globally, with, of course, a much smaller share of population. And we see on a per capita basis that transport emissions are 15 times greater in those countries, above what the Paris Agreement targets would have us be reaching. Another threat or another shortcoming is looking at resilience in transport systems in national plans. So if we look at nationally determined contributions within the UN system, we have less than a third of NDCs focused on transport resilience. Among national adaptation plans, it's less than half, and these are coming from countries, lower income countries that are even more vulnerable. A further threat is that financing is not keeping up with the investments we need, noting that 2/3 of investment in the past decade have gone toward road transport, as opposed to more complete streets and broader set of transport investments. And of course, as mentioned, fossil fuel subsidies continue to outpace renewable spending by orders of magnitude. So of course, I'd like to end on the better news, looking at a few of the opportunities. And again, some of these perhaps have been touched on in other conversations, but I think it's very important to look at the commitments we do have to phase out internal combustion engines. Again, not moving strictly from one engine to another battery, but it's an important step forward. Nearly 30 countries, plus the EU, a dozen cities and regions, and a growing number of manufacturers, as we know, are moving in this direction. We're seeing, again, electric vehicles not as a one-size-fits-all, but we're seeing more e-buses, seeing that they're becoming more affordable and more broadly deployed, especially in parts of the global south, in China, in Chile, and Colombia, where the largest electric bus fleets are. And of course, the 200 million electric bikes in China alone. So it's exciting to see electric mobility in sort of a right-sized approach. And a final point that I would make is, again, as we had seen in the pandemic, change can happen quickly with political will. Having 200 cities with open streets during the pandemic to open up other types of transport behavior, and with Europe alone rolling out 1,500 kilometers of new cycle lanes in that time. So, of course, the important thing is to keep those moving from a pop-up phase to something more permanent. So with that, I would look ahead to the third edition of the TCC-GSR. with a number of contributors in this room, including Andrea and others. So we look forward to rolling that out in the fall, updating some of these trends, and we look forward to ongoing collaboration with the global transport community, working toward the TCC GSR and, of course, other work from SLOCAT.
Super, thanks so much, Christophe.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Andrea. And I would like to thank the Shared Use Mobility Center. Last time I've been invited on this stage, it was in 2018. And at that time, I was just about to launch Blue LA and Blue Indy, a fully electric vehicle car sharing program. And this is the mission I have in my company for 15 years. It's trying to decarbonize, to help cities to reach carbon neutrality. And the idea of not only bringing EVs and batteries, because we are manufacturing batteries, it's also maybe to go further with having a fully electric vehicle car share program. We were able to do it in cities like Paris starting in 2011, Singapore, LA, London, but it was not good and we stopped this operation. And this is, I think, very important because you were mentioning it, what is not working. It's all about a political issue as well. It's not because we have the COP21, we have all countries around the table are saying, yes, I would like to achieve this by 2030, 2040. No, you have a mayor in each city. And when the mayor of Paris decided to move forward with a fully private public service offering, it was kind of public and private, fully integrated without competition, fully integrated within transit mobility offering. But at the end of the day, if you want that this is working, such an infrastructure that is requiring heavy investments in terms of charge points, cars, maintenance, a lot of people, you need to have a minimum, I would say, number of rentals and usage. The only way to make it happen, on the other side, the mayor or the DOT need to say, I am going to have in place some policies to reduce the single car usage, which mean maybe having super expensive parking fees, maybe reducing the number of parking bays in a city, maybe no more authorizing a garage in apartments, and just pushing for having a change in terms of behavior to have people using the transit, to also obviously use a new type of mobility, micromobility, shared use. All those new mobility are complementary. But at the end of the day, when a mayor, when an authority needs to say, now, you guys, you are living in my city, you can't have any more a car, or actually you are going to pay 3 times how much, they are not going to be reelected. And this is exactly what happened in Paris, in Singapore, and this is why at the end of the day, we had just to step back, because I mean, we were, as a company, losing hundreds of millions of dollars per year to make it happen. So that's I think it's one of the key issues. On the other side, decarbonization is key. Reaching carbon neutrality is absolutely key. It's not only passenger transportation in cities, it's also the goods transportation. We are more and more living in cities today. We are then having a more and more demand in terms of delivery. We see over the COVID time as well some new delivery schemes happening, like the delivery bots, fully electric, new pilots actually to take place in Santa Monica with the low emission delivery program to which we have been participating. So it's interesting to see that to make it happen, you need to align policies, the politicians. It's not only about people to be transported, but also the goods. And you need to regulate, to change behaviors. And the offering, the tech companies, the new solutions that we see are really, really interesting. But they need also to be organized in a way that these new mobility solutions are safe. They are equitable as well. You need to be able to have that all your residents and visitors have an access to this mobility. It's not, if you remember the time when all the micromobility operators came, it was a little bit disorganized at the beginning. We were seeing super strange behavior, like having a scooter being used on the sidewalk, which is not good for the pedestrian. A city like London is clearly having in mind walking and cycling. So really using that kind of approach to really make it. So it's about safety, it's about equity, it's about less complaints as well. Everyone will need to be actually in a position to access easily. So that's the key issues I see in this key decarbonization narratives.
Super. So I'm catching a couple of things, but essentially I think it comes back to what Jyot was mentioning about it has to be more than a tech change. It has to be a transformational change, and it has to be equitable and inclusive. So taking those into consideration, what do you think are kind of the challenges to fuse these two agendas together, the decarbonization agenda and the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals agenda that calls for inclusion and equity? And whoever wants to raise their hands for that.
I mean, I can jump in from an investments. Again, I think I'm going to be Mr. Macro today, talking about the big picture and trying to connect that to the, of course, local implementation. But what I can describe a bit some work that SLOCAT is doing to support multilateral development banks in creating what we're calling a gold standard of transport investment. So as you may be aware, a number of development banks have decided to, or have committed, I should say, to aligning their operations, their investment portfolios with the Paris Agreement. And we would like to see this go a bit further, not only focused on climate change, emissions reductions, but also taking into account, as you'd mentioned, Andrea, the Sustainable Development Goals, the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development. We'd like to see, and again, of course, it's very important to align with those Paris Agreement targets, but also to look at aspects such as equity, to look at nexus between transportation and health and energy, to look at green jobs and just transition, just energy transition, and of course, to look at these development banks which have very strong investing power, to invest in a broader set of activities, not simply building roads, not simply expanding airports, but looking across the avoid, shift, and improve framework so that we have more of that combination of things coming together. So we've been supporting the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank in aligning their investment strategies. And this is a fairly new bank, or it's established in the last 6 or 7 years in Beijing, focused on Asia and beyond as well. We've been in the process of creating a methodology, a tool to help the bank assess whether their investments are Paris aligned, and in the process, again, pushing toward more of this SDG alignment as well, so that we not only affect what's up in the atmosphere, but what's happening to life on the ground and quality of life. And so it's been a very exciting but very challenging process, because there's really a paradigm shift to make happen on a very tight time frame. They will kick this off in July of this year. We're finishing this project sort of yesterday or tomorrow, so it's it's coming right down to it. It's very exciting, but there's also alignment with the internal stakeholders, aligning criteria with other development banks. So, and I guess the really most challenging thing as we look at road investments, airport investments, and try to broaden that a little bit, is to make sure that we're actually seeing emission reductions. So I will wind down that topic by saying that SLOCAT is also putting together a blog series and a series of knowledge products focusing on this gold standard for transport investments. And again, it's bringing experts together, bringing a space for peer exchange on these ideas, and how we can get the sort of high-level investment to really make change happen on the ground. And so I'd invite you to have a look at that and contribute your thoughts to what is needed, both at this higher investment level, or I should say the investment levels with a lot of zeros after them, and to make sure they're being translated into the change that will make things work on the ground.
Super, thanks, Karl. And I think there's a concept under the climate conversation that kind of englobes what we're trying to embrace here that's the just transition, that's trying to make sure that when we transition towards decarbonized economies, no one gets left behind, and that the people that are currently the most vulnerable don't fall under another layer of vulnerability. So, Jyot, I know you have some experiences in India and also talking maybe about the opportunities also on investments, as Karl was mentioning. Can you comment a bit on those and how we can kind of start incorporating that view of a just transition in decarbonization of transport?
Yeah, maybe I'll start by saying something a little controversial. I was reflecting on all the federal infrastructure funding that's available in the US, $3 trillion. And I was thinking, oh my God, this could be disastrous. Just let it sink in for a moment. $3 trillion, if it's used the way we've always used it in the past, we're locked in for the rest of this century in these unsustainable pathways. What we're doing as part of something called the Communities First Infrastructure Alliance is rethinking how investments might be made and starting from a point of, from community priorities, community voices. I think that oftentimes when funding becomes available, projects that have been pre-written that maybe haven't centered equity or haven't centered climate kind of get a refresh and get sent in, right? And I understand that. People are strapped for time. No one has people who can sit and write grant proposals. And so those are the proposals that get sent in. And that's what's going to put us down exact same pathway, because we're going to end up in the exact same places that already have received investment doing the exact same projects. So I really think that, you know, how do we turn this on its head? How do we start in community with community priorities, with community voices? And it's a big challenge because when you're talking about the federal infrastructure funding, the grant recipients are not community-based organizations. And if you start looking at what is the history of trust between community-based organizations or community leaders and local authorities, local governments, that's not always a good relationship. There is history there. And so how do we start at that level and start to build joint vision, start to build trust? I think that it can't happen overnight. But you know, now is the time to sort of start at that level, which is at the ground level with community voices as part of the process, and not, thank you, not as a box to check at the end. That was one thought, and then I had another thought.
Just transition in the excess.
Just transition. Just transition. So there's clearly the topic of you know, moving jobs or jobs that will be lost and new jobs will be created. But one of the things that's sort of at the top of my mind today is learning a lot more about the extraction of minerals for our new green economy. And there's an aspect to it which is around the mining and the environmental impacts of that. And then there's a very real human slavery aspect to it, which is very well hidden. And I had the opportunity to read a book by Siddharth Kara called Red Cobalt. Sorry, I'm forgetting the name. But it's essentially talking about modern day slavery in the Congo today that is being very deliberately hidden to extract these minerals. And so just the thought of buying another phone, buying a laptop, like to me, sorry, I'm being a bit controversial, it's a bit repulsive to me now that I've learned this. And it's a truth that is very well hidden today. So I think approaching things from a transport perspective obviously is important, but I think we have to learn from organizations that approach things from an equity perspective, from a racial equity perspective, from a human slavery perspective. Otherwise, we're always having community and people as a box to check in the end.
Thank you so much. So going back a bit towards, Karl mentioned it briefly, which is this framework of avoiding, shifting, and improving, where we need to kind of try to avoid trips as much as possible. And yeah, I think this, okay. Trying to shift towards more sustainable and inclusive modes, and then finally trying to improve, which electrifying goes under that. Yeah, okay, this is coming back. Under the shift element, which sometimes gets lost in the conversations of electrification, what role does micromobility have in trying to change these narratives and contributing to these goals?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for the question. So first, I want to second something that Jyot said earlier, which is the both-and approach. So we really know that shared micromobility doesn't exist in a vacuum, and it's really supportive of a multimodal framework. And as you mentioned, actually at the very top, that just focusing on cars and car electrification isn't going to get us to our goals. And so shared micromobility is really part of, I'll say it again, I said it in the intro as well, really building and creating a whole ecosystem that is more resilient and sustainable and equitable. So a few things a few opportunities really that I want to bring to the fore. The first is that we have a real opportunity, as there is so much focus on building out an EV charging network for cars, that we could be really doing that multimodally, including shared micromobility, but really thinking through all different modes and frankly even other needs of our sort of modern day communities, towns and cities. That as we are digging and developing the grid for EV charging, that we're also developing the grid for future shared micromobility charging, both placements for that, but also the nodes to hook up the charging, so that in 20 years, we're not looking back and we have this moment where, oh, that was such an opportunity. Now it's gonna be so much more expensive and so much more of an upheaval. So I like to call that dig once, which is a very familiar concept to a lot of planners and public works. And so really, I think we have a great opportunity here to think collaboratively and bolster our communication between departments and modes. And that's something that shared micromobility can be at the forefront is, and frankly within the industry is already at the forefront of. The second is we're talking about mode choice again and mode shift to active transportation. Shared micromobility really helps to encourage and build that in communities, and also then create safer street environments for everyone. So that's just a huge opportunity that's out there, and both of those rely on more investment in scale. So Jyot mentioned $3 trillion. Not enough of that, hardly any of that is going to shared micromobility. So if we want to really leverage shared micromobility for the tool that it is, and we know it is, and we have the numbers to back it up, then we need to spend more of that money on shared micromobility, linking it to, we love to say this buzzword ecosystem, but honestly, I think it's a great word for it. We need to include shared micromobility more so that we can realize the benefits and get to a bigger scale that frankly we're very primed for.
Okay, thanks. Christophe, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you are totally right. I mean, the role of micromobility is really, really important, but it's one piece of the puzzle. It's one solution. We need to add and complement with other solutions as well. What is key with micromobility is that clearly when you have in front of the micromobility implementation at scale, considering not only maybe a city, but all the cities and neighboring cities, you need to offer something that every people will like and support. And you were mentioning shift. A shift means you need to change the behavior of someone so that they are going to use something that is meeting our carbon neutrality goals, which means that it needs to be safe, which means the here. And this is what cities have not a real view on right now is, where do I need to put my bike lanes? Because I want to have people now don't use anymore their car for short trips and use a bike or scooters. And this is the thing, it's requiring costs in terms of infrastructure, but knowledge. And this is the good thing, and we will see later in the discussion. All the services now they are connected. So there are ways now to have an idea of where is the demand, where are the patterns, what are the trips that I want the people to do instead of actually using their polluted or ICE car, as an example.
You mentioned something there about having like different choices for different people, and this is something that's really important. Sometimes when we talk about transport and decarbonizing, we always want a silver bullet. We want one solution to solve it all, and that will be the wonderful solution. But we need to think about systems, and the only way to eat an elephant is little bites between a lot of people. That's a saying that I really like. So how can we think about creating that ecosystem of little bites and little actors, and how can we transition towards understanding transport decarbonization as something that needs systemic change and that needs integration between different modes? Who wants to go on that?
I can take it. Sorry, go for it.
Well, I can jump in with yet another macro point, but I think, and again, just to be clear, SLOCAT, we're very small. We have a very large network and work closely with different branches of the UN Climate Change branch and the Sustainable Development branch of the UN. But as a secretariat, we're quite small. We really focus globally. And so I think in terms of changing behaviors, actually I'll use a global example and then a more local one. Fossil fuel phase out, I mentioned it in passing, but feel the need to come back to it just to touch on briefly the global conversation. And so Joe, you'd mentioned the dynamic at the Climate Summit in Glasgow, COP26 in 2021, talking about that kind of breakthrough in terms of expanding the view of the electrification conversation. And I would also say COP26 was notable because we had, for the first time, the outcome document from the summit talked specifically about phasing out coal, phasing out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. So we came into the conference last year, COP27, coincidentally, with sort of raising hopes to push that further, and it was just a bit more complicated. India was really leading a charge to expand the phase out of fossil fuels, not just to coal, but to bring it to other fuels. That was supported by 80 countries, including big producers, fossil producers such as Australia and Canada and the US, of course. At the same time, African countries were pushing back a bit in sort of keeping natural gas as a bridge fuel. So both acknowledging the impacts, the negative impacts on communities, but also seeing this as a very important revenue source, especially in parts of West Africa and Southern Africa. So, and to challenge it even more, the fossil fuel lobbyists at the conference, had they been a national delegation, they would have been the second largest delegation at the conference, outnumbered only by the United Arab Emirates, who will host, of course, this year's conference. So it's getting, I guess to quote Alice in Wonderland, curiouser and curiouser as we go, but we're not making that important progress. And I think in the phasing out the fossil fuels, of course, changing that price signal and pricing things properly, of course, is what will help with the shift to those other investments toward micromobility and so on. And then my very micro example, as it turns out, I dropped off my daughter at the airport at 5 a.m. this morning for her civil rights school field trip. That's earlier than I'm usually out in the world, but realizing as I came back into the city that there's construction going on the Kennedy Expressway coming into town, and at 5 a.m. traffic was already starting to pile up, and I see a lot of people nodding in the room. I'm never in the car, and I'm never on the Kennedy, but it was interesting at that hour. The reason, though, that's important for the shift conversation is because I've also been reading with former colleagues of the Chicago Transit Authority. Finally, we're seeing more important shifts to regional rail, to the commuter rail, Metra service in the Chicago area. And so it's really, you need to squeeze, of course, the price signals or literally squeeze the lanes to actually make those shifts happen. So just to bring it both from the macro to the micro and seeing where the behavior change happens.
Thanks so much.
I'd like to add just a point that is a bit more just overall contextual about the systems question, and really just to reiterate, Jyot, a point that you made earlier, which is that if we're wanting to look at a systems approach to decarbonizing transportation, that we also can't just be looking at it as transportation. I love that you brought in the hidden slavery in the Congo and other elements. We really have to see people as well and how transportation is linking with the rest of these other systems to have a systemic approach.
Thanks. I like that everything's kind of coming together, and I liked thinking about the either or both. So when we're surrounded by a lot of transport planners from cities that have to decide based on a budget what they're going to do. So how can we, or what would you recommend to these transport planners when we're thinking of avoiding, shifting, improving, of understanding the transport system as a system? How can we promote that integration between modes and that diversity of options for people? I'd like to open that floor for you.
Okay, I can start. This is what we can get today in terms of knowledge. It's pretty interesting. We are now living in a digital era where everything is getting or is connected. You can buy your parking bay, I mean your right to park thanks to a mobile app, which means there is a data flow. You have access to micromobility operations thanks to an app. You jump into your Uber thanks to an app. Even the taxi, now you can grab them thanks to the Curb app here in the US as an example. You can now have a dematerials app to jump on the public transportation. And usually public transportation, they are sharing on an open data portal the right data, when the bus is coming, any disruptions in terms of metro, etc. So a city today, a big city like Chicago as an example, with different mobility service providers, boats, micromobility, ride sharing, taxis, trams, trains, it is possible to give to a planner all the data of what's happening on the ground. Obviously, it's a partnership with the city and all the mobilities providers and platform that can aggregate that data directly, give all of a sudden a unique vision of what's happening. And not only on things that moves, but also on the spaces, the public right-of-way, how it's being used. In London, there are sensors on each intersections. You also have sensors on some bike lanes, just right before intersections, because there is a reason why two wheels, bikes, are a real safety issue here. This is where we have fatalities between buses and bikes, as an example. So it's all about having data on, do we see cars on those parking bays? And with the parking meters data or even sensors on the ground, you have this. So today, a city, a planner can really have access to curb data and to mobility data. More than that, it's been now a few years that there are some standards. There are different types of standards, but it's getting standardized, which is now plug and play from a city to the other. A mobility service provider can be in compliance with a data sharing program with any cities, now not only in the US, but in Europe, in Asia. So which is really fantastic today. And having a dashboard that is bringing the vision of all the different type of mobility, allowing a planner to actually think how I can optimize the journey of my visitor, of my resident, because obviously your journey is never going to be just micromobility or car or no. Maybe you're going to start walking, then you go on a tube, or maybe you're going to start walking and then it's a scooter ride, and maybe you need to go outside of the city and then you have a car share ride. But you want that to be really efficient, which means that planner need to define not only for safety reason and efficiency reason where to put the bike lanes, where to put the right number of parking corrals with the right capacity. But it's also all about understanding the demand, where all people are going. As an example here, we work with the city of New York City. In New York City, they said, well, it's really great. I can see everything, the mopeds, the micromobility, rideshare, it's really fantastic. But who is actually driving those things? It's not a scooter that has a behavior. This is the person behind. So they want to go further and to have kind of a unique identifier, totally blurred, and we don't know who is driving, but New York knows that maybe you, Andrea, you are taking today a Lime scooter, and the day after, a Bird scooter, which is not something that you do. For you, it's 2 trips. And maybe tomorrow you are using something else. And what they want to understand is, okay, Andrea, you live in this block, you have this, you're in this group age, and this is all about understanding the patterns of who is using what, where I need to invest in terms of infrastructure, where do I need to put my charge points if I want to support the EV uptake. And this is what is totally new today with all those services that are now connected, that cities can really benefit of it. And this is coming, this is happening, and this is really brand new in terms of capabilities for a pure planning perspective. Obviously, you need also to regulate and then after that to have the right data-driven policies to support decarbonization. Maybe you are going to have free parking for all people owning an EV. Maybe it's going to be free permitting for EV car share and not a free permit for normal car share. And that's the whole idea of what can be achieved today.
I'm glad that you mentioned data. No, I was actually going to call on you.
Oh, well, telepathically communicating.
Yeah. No, because we were talking that the transformation has to go beyond the technological change, but at the end of the day, these technological changes are allowing us to have data, to plan, to understand mobility patterns, to make decisions, and to have more options. So I was going to maybe ask you too, because I know you've been involved with different projects using technology, right? And new technologies and different options for people to be able to achieve their mobility goals. So for you, what's the role of technology to contribute to this decarbonization conversation? And if your contribution didn't have to do with that, go ahead and say what you want.
Weave that in as well, but we were telepathically communicating because I was going to underscore that we do have more access to really good data than ever before to do good planning and support the project. So underscoring that, and along with that, in particular, a special plug to please create more safe, protected, connected places for people to ride. That supports the entire ecosystem of transportation and our sustainability and equitable goals. So yeah, that's point one. The role of technology, though, I would say certainly the data piece is a big one, but also the fact that we innovate and we create. So, one overarching really theme in this whole conversation is electrification and shared micromobility. It's no different. We're also seeing an incredible electrification wave there, and with that, these new technologies are creating, for example, the ability for people to go further, e-bikes, for example, and e-scooters, where it's new riders and people that wouldn't otherwise be riding either of those devices. So certainly technological innovation has a role. But we, again, definitely need to support that with safe, protected, and connected, meaningful places for people to ride. And then also your original question around sort of there being planners in the room and sort of what do you want to say? So my plug for connected safe networks is definitely one. Looking at the data is another, and then back to this point about collaboration and collaborate with colleagues and talk to people that you don't ordinarily talk to about these things, and as well as make sure that you're connecting and talking to the community, and that the community is also representative of your city, your town, and that you're definitely talking to people that are different than you.
Great, thanks so much. Jyot, do you want to contribute anything?
Yeah, I think I agree with both Christophe and Sam on the points they've made. Maybe the only thing I'd add is that technology offers a good window to make changes that can be leveraged for other things. So I'm thinking about, because I spoke to Benji earlier about informal transport systems globally that, in some cities are the main transport system. As we think about funding that is coming for electrification, is there maybe a chance to use that to help people who are paying daily rent for their vehicles to actually own their vehicles? And is there a way to sort of shift that system and think about these operators as micro-entrepreneurs? Right? So I think that technology shift offers that moment in time when you can change a number of things along with the technology. So I think that's great.
Great. Thanks so much. I have been told 1 minute. Okay, so 1 minute to close. So I wanted to open up the floor for questions, but we won't have time. Thank you so much for all your insights, and thank you also for the crowd for listening. I think what we've been discussing is very much aligned with the beginning of the conversation about fusing agendas, right? So we are facing a climate crisis, we are facing a biodiversity crisis, we're facing socioeconomic crises in so many countries and cities around the world. So we need to do more with the little we have. We need to collaborate between different departments, different agencies, different cities. We need to be efficient in the way we're collaborating. We need to work on different agendas at once, also on different approaches. We need to be very smart about the way we are using funds to avoid those lock-ins, really thinking about the future. We can't put all our investments in one big project that will keep us stuck in this model forever. So definitely we need to start incorporating and planning using data, informed decision-making based on data, and using technology and innovation to start shifting this conversation from electric vehicles alone to a system that's diverse, that's inclusive, that offers different options for different people, and that also ensures that no one is left behind. So thank you again for all your valuable insights, and this is it. Thanks so much.